Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be here today to tell you about what SPARC has been up to with our research data that we collect from you in SPARC. And first, can everyone see my screen? Good, okay. So first, just a few acknowledgements. I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have any information to present to you if it weren't for all of the families in SPARC. Thank you. The SPARC team, the clinical sites and our SPARC clinical site network, and my partner Libby Brooks, who is a clinical data specialist who provided most of the beautiful graphics that you will see today. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is phenotyping, some of the research goals in SPARC, tell you about the measures and some of what we're finding. So first, what is phenotyping? Your phenotype is everything about you that comes from your genotype, your set of genes. So in autism research and autism genetics research, we frequently look at these traits, the core traits of autism, and we're all familiar with these: social, communication, repetitive behaviors, and all of the other issues that can go along with autism. Now, there's another way to think about the traits and to think about phenotype in research, and that is an individual's profile. So what you're seeing here is a hypothetical example of someone's profile, showing all of those traits and if they're high or low on each trait. So if you could imagine a person receiving a profile or sort of like a report card, and each trait, the high or low, is kind of like looking at temperature on a thermometer. Each person has their own unique profile. But what if we imagine that there are actually many people who share a very similar profile, and we can find them in common and group them together? If we can do that, then that's a smarter way to go about trying to find meaningful groups and types of autism. Then we can look at, do these types of autism have different genetic bases? And are there different approaches that would help? So in summary, goals of phenotyping are to try to make sense of the many different types of autism that are now lumped together under the umbrella term autism, ASD, to try to understand why people with autism can be different from each other. Do some of the traits cluster together? How do they link to genetics? And how does the environment interact with our genes? So some of our questions in SPARC, the first questions that are essential to us are, we need to know who's in SPARC. We want to know more about how girls are different from boys. We want to know about early signs of autism development in young children and how it changes over time as children age. And finally, what are some of the particular needs of adults with autism? So to do this, we collect information from you through our SPARC surveys. So the first surveys are surveys that we construct ourselves. So this is just essential background information that we get from you about diagnosis, about medical issues, other diagnoses, and background history. Then there are also standardized measures. A standardized measure is a test that wants to combine or compare many people on the same exact trait. And to do that, the best way to do that is to always use the same consistent methods for everyone. And they find in testing measures that it's best if you ask for the information more than once in different ways to make sure that it's consistent. And this is why sometimes you might notice that we're asking a very similar kind of question to you over and over. The other thing about standardized measures is that with all of the same methods that we use, it sometimes feels like it's trying to be a one-size-fits-all, when really we know that it's not one-size-fits-all in autism. So sometimes that's why some of the questions might feel like they don't really apply to you or your child. But we just need to ask the same thing across everyone. That way we can compare. And we can also compare all the way from California to England, which we do. There are many published standardized tests out there. They are constructed by scientists in the field, and they go through many years of rigorous testing to make sure that they measure traits consistently and to make sure that they are measuring what they intend to measure. So our current SPARC standardized measures include the social communication questionnaire, that's called the SCQ, the repetitive behavior scale, the RBSR, and the coordination questionnaire. So why do we collect these particular measures? Well, to start with, what's essential to know in most any autism study, and especially autism genetics study, we need to know those core ASD traits, and we need to know the impact or the extent of those traits and how people differ, what the differences are in them. We want to know other behavior diagnoses, other medical issues. We're looking for clues to rare genetic changes. We're looking at siblings and other important factors. So here are the measures we have to do this, some of which you'll see are earmarked for the coming year. So then I can show you how these measures line up to tap exactly the kind of information that we need in research. So for all of those types of information, there is a measure doing the job for us, and that is why we're giving you these measures. Okay, so next, so where does your SPARC data go? What do we want to do with the resulting data that we collect? So the first is obviously we are looking for new autism risk genes that we report back to you, and we want to contribute to the world and to the fund of knowledge about autism. And to do this, we do look at clues in your information. So for example, if we're suspecting that a gene, a genetic change might be significant, it might be impactful, we want to look at that impact. Are there seizures present? Are there other medical issues present? That all lends to being able to say that a gene and the genetic change may be significant. We have a program called Research Match, where we will link researchers up with you, and they look at our data, anonymous of course, but they look at our data to find individuals that they want to study in their particular research study. And I'll show you examples of that in a moment. We have our own phenotyping research going on here that I'm involved with, and my colleagues on the SPARC team are involved with. And this is with PIs from our clinical sites in the SPARC network. So we're looking at adults. We're looking at differences between males and females. We're coming up with a method to rate the impact of specific genetic changes, and we're looking at parent stress. Of course, one of the wonderful things about the Safari initiative at the Simons Foundation is that we have a warehouse of anonymous data that we keep, we protect, and we store for you, so we can share with qualified researchers around the world so they can make new discoveries. So we take the information you give us, it's stored in numerical format, it's completely anonymous. Researchers, scientists from universities around the world apply to us for permission to access that data, and we review and we approve it. And then they will make discoveries from there. And currently we have dozens of studies going on with our Safari cohort data, including the SPARC data. And of course, we want to return the data to you. And so we have snapshot reports that we've posted to the community, and we have individual results reports from most of the measures that we have coming up to return to you. And so we want to hear what you would like us to measure and return to you as well. Here's an example of Research Match. So some of the things that the researchers will scan our data for to find you would be, they might be looking for particular language abilities, particular ages, genetic conditions, specific issues like sleep problems or eating problems. And then when they find you, they can invite you to, if you're in SPARC, they can invite you to one of many studies. Currently, we have 52 studies going on that have been approved by researchers, and they're able to get in touch with you in SPARC. And these are just a few of them that are going on right now. Here's an example of a SPARC snapshot. This was our most recent update. And these are sent out, links are sent out in the newsletter, and Vincent can tell us more about how to access those as well. So what are some of the findings that we're making in SPARC so far with our data? So this table here is just to show you what we have collected. So I want to point out we have over 90,000 basic questionnaires. That is the medical screening form that we have. We have over 43,000 SCQs. I am pretty sure that we have more SCQs than anyone in the world, and we're pretty proud of that. And I'm going to tell you why later. I'll tell you the so what in a little bit. You might notice if you look at the background history questionnaire, I only have a little over 1,000 from the ASD adults, so a shout out to any adults that are out there. Please do your background history form because we need it. Okay, so let's look at what we collect and what we've been finding. So we have over 150,000 people in SPARC now, which is amazing. And of those people, over 59,000 have autism. And they range in age from age 1 year all the way up to 85 years of age. You'll see in the age distribution graph that most of our participants are school age, elementary school age, in fact. There are some other interesting bits of information here. Our ratio of males to females is similar to that that's been published widely for stats for autism. We have about 1/5 of our participants have intellectual disability, and about 1/4 are considered minimally verbal, and that is single words or no words. In terms of race and ethnicity, we are nearly 80% Caucasian. We have initiatives going on right now where we have funded special efforts to do outreach for underrepresented groups and minorities to improve our percentages. In terms of language levels, this is looking at the children and the adults who have guardians in our cohort. And you can see that most of them have fluent speech, and that means complex sentences and able to tell you a little bit of a short story. So the background history form, these are the kinds of information that we collect: family, school history, and for adults, we ask about daily living. So here are some of what we found. I found this to be very interesting about early development in children with autism. And I want to point out that because our numbers are so large, I think we're the largest collection. So we can start to form the benchmarks and the foundation for information, knowledge about autism and how children with autism develop. So that's very exciting to me. So you can see first thing, if you look at these first early milestones, the standard milestones that pediatricians check in on, that generally children with autism are on time and generally not delayed. Vast majority, 95% or more, not delayed in motor milestones. But of course, language, not surprisingly, is delayed. I thought it was very interesting when I looked at the data that for the children who were late to talk, that there are still children over the age of 7 who are able to learn to talk. And I want to point that out because for many years, it was discussed that it really was a turning point by age 5, but we are finding more and more now, more recently in research, and I think these statistics speak to that it is possible to learn language later. In terms of first concern, this is parents' first concern reported, and the type of concern and the age at which it was reported, and this is usually regarded as the onset of autism. Of course, not surprisingly, in most cases, it was a speech delay that concerned the parent. And after that, a delay or difference in the baby's social engagement with others. And you'll notice that not many cited regression as the first tip that they had, that there was something going on. So that means that there is something going on before regression in many children, and I'll show you why in a moment. First concerns usually appear in the first or second year of life. The average age of onset is 22 months, according to parent report. And that is interesting because despite the fact that that is 22 months of age, our average age of diagnosis in SPARC is still not until closer to 4.5 years of age. 4 to 4.5 is the average age of diagnosis. So regression actually affects 44% of our kids. And so I want to point out that that stands in contrast to the 10% of parents who reported regression was their first sign of something. So clearly, there is something going on prior to the regression. And most frequently, what parents see first is that there was a loss of speech, loss of language skills. And that is typically happening in the second year of life. The average age for that loss also is 22 months. It typically lasts 1 to 2 years, according to our parents. And at the time of reporting on the questionnaire, about 1/3 of the kids with regression still hadn't resolved their language regression. The other children lost skills in social relatedness or play or other skills. And then there were approximately 40% that lost both language and social skills. The average age for losing social play or other skills is much later, interestingly, and closer to age 3. The children who had a language regression are much more likely to show persisting cognitive delays later compared to children who have not had a language regression. Now let's turn to adults, a little bit of information about what we found in adults. This here is showing when we asked adults how old they were when they got diagnosed, it's showing the distribution of that age range of their first diagnosis. So you'll see for males, it's somewhat evenly distributed. There's preschool, there's school age, there's adulthood. But you'll notice for females, what stands out here is that a majority of women are not diagnosed until after 18. And in fact, we know that girls and women tend to be recognized later. When I looked at our data for girls, they are diagnosed later. When I look at our data for women with guardians, they're diagnosed later. So there's a problem with under-recognition of signs of autism in women and in girls. In terms of other facts about adults in SPARC, we have education and employment. And education level was very interesting because we find if you look at this breakdown of education levels, and this is highest level of education completed, we have a majority who have been to college. And if you add up everyone that's been to college, taken some college, and including associate's degree at community college and completed that degree, we have, I think, 73% here. So we have a very highly educated cohort of adults with autism in SPARC. In terms of employment, a majority are employed full-time or part-time or are currently attending school. Some data that we've gotten back from the basic questionnaire. This is what the basic questionnaire asks about. It's medical screening. We want to know about medical and environmental complications. We want to know about major markers of rare genetic syndromes, because as I told you, we look for clues, and we want to know other medical history. So I'm going to focus for a moment on the other diagnoses, and here in particular, focus on some major ones, depression, anxiety, and ADHD. And looking at this, you can see what jumps out immediately is the rate of depression in our adults. It's extremely high. It's at least 3 times higher than the national average for depression in the United States. And that's very troubling. It's indicative of an unmet need, I think, in our population. I think the other thing that's interesting here are the rates of ADHD. They stay pretty consistent over the ages, so it gets recognized early now in childhood, which is good, and it stays pretty steady across, but it's very high. The rates are higher than the US averages. So for data that we've obtained from our standardized measures, I'm going to go through our SCQ, our RBS, and our coordination questionnaire. So first, the social communication questionnaire. Many of you in SPARC have completed this. So what is it? So we ask parents about social behavior, communication, and play behaviors, current and past critical period. And these are questions about skills and behaviors that are known to be really core and really important to autism. So why do we collect it, and why do researchers collect the SCQ? Well, the first thing is that it is commonly used by researchers to confirm the presence of signs of autism in their participants. You can boil it down, break it down into two major traits, social communication and repetitive behavior, and look at that data separately. And then you can look at how those traits, those clusters, relate to genetics and to heritability. We can also look in our data at how these traits predict other abilities. So very quickly, here is a distribution of the SCQ data. This is how scientists would look at the data. This is the first thing you do when you look at your data. You look at how it's distributed. So I'm going to do some more webinars and instructing folks on how to read their results reports. And these reports that SPARC families receive, they include histograms that look like this. And so I'll walk through how to read those a little bit better at that point. But for now, just quickly, along the bottom are the scores from 0 up to 39. The higher the score, the more problems were reported by the parent. The height of the blue bars shows you how many children had each score. Basically, what you want to look at here is a 15. That is what we call the cutoff for risk of autism. It's the score that through tons of research has been found to be more or less a magic number, and the scores around 10 or 11 are also a magic number for considering what is significant, a significant number of symptoms of autism. And so in SPARC, 86% of kids are at or above a score of 15. And so why is this important? Why is this significant? Well, researchers can come to our cohort of many thousands of individuals and look at it and say, these children have a very similar profile to children who have been very rigorously studied and assessed thoroughly in a clinic. And we've done this from thousands of miles away. So this looks very good. This looks very good scientifically. The next is the RBSR. The RBSR is asking about repetitive behaviors. This could be movements, it could be sensory interests, it could be routines, and it can be fascination with subjects, many different types of behaviors. And it measures not only the amount or number of behaviors, but also the impact, because it asks parents how much of a problem they consider it to be. Some parents don't feel it's a problem, and many individuals don't feel that their repetitive behaviors are a problem. For some kids, it interferes. And so some parents, some families, and some individuals do feel that some of their repetitive behaviors at least are an issue. So why do we study it? Well, particularly interesting is a factor that's been derived statistically called insistence on sameness. So this is, you know, when a child has to sit in the same spot at the dinner table, has to take the same route to school every day. They have to do things at a particular time or in a particular order. This is very common. This particular factor tracks really well with genetics, actually, and it's considered a really good factor to study in, especially in biological studies, because it's pure, if you want to call it that. It's unique. It's not tangled up with things like IQ or your language level. It's like no matter what your other abilities or your other level of autism traits, this insistence on sameness stands alone. And it also has been found to run in families. the tendency toward insistence on sameness. So here is a sample of the individual results report that we send to families after they fill out the RBSR. This is just a sample. And if you look again at the histogram, the bar chart up at the top, it's basically just telling us the scores you see range from 0 all the way up to 130s. And SPARC children have a lot of repetitive behavior, and we have higher levels of repetitive behavior than other giant cohorts that are out there. So why is this significant? Well, again, I think because we have so many thousands of children here, we can begin to form benchmarks. We can begin to offer ground truth on repetitive behavior in autism, how it develops, and look at all those factors like the insistence on sameness, like compulsive behaviors, and learn a lot about autism. The coordination questionnaire asks parents about very specific fine motor and gross motor skills like writing and running and walking. And the way that it's scored is we know what score is expected from studying typically developing children, and then we can compare. And it's used to screen for motor delays. So why is it important in autism? Well, a lot's been made recently about disruption of motor functioning in autism. It's increasingly recognized. And it's important because basically your ability to navigate the world physically allows you to explore it and to interact with others and participate. And research has found that very early delays in fine motor skills in particular can predict autism traits later, and that the delays in infancy go along with speech delay. Another interesting thing about motor skills, which made it very important for us to focus on in SPARC, was that our earlier genetic study, our first and one of the first largest genetic studies ever, the Simon Simplex collection, found that delays on the coordination questionnaire were the measure that correlated most strongly with significant genetic changes that were found. And that was out of all of the autism traits. This coordination questionnaire stood out as correlating with genetics. Here is a snippet of our data. So you'll see that a vast, vast majority of children in SPARC with ASD have motor delays according to what parents reported on the coordination questionnaire. Nearly 80% in the younger ones and 90% in school age and teens. So now, how will all of this data, where will it go? How will it help research? I want to talk about what's next. So what we're going to be looking out for in the future are all of the discoveries coming out from this data. The researchers around the world that are accessing the SPARC data are currently looking at the topics that you see listed here and more. And so we expect to see many breakthroughs in the next few years, thanks to the information that you in SPARC have contributed. What's next for us? So for those of you in SPARC, keep a lookout on your dashboard. We're hoping to add a lot more measures so we can collect more valuable information from you. And I would love to hear also what you would like us to be studying, what you would like us to hear from you and focus on. And I just want to say thank you. I want to thank you for the time to be able to talk to you today and share with you what we're doing in SPARC.
All right. Thank you so much, LeeAnne. And thank you all for being on the line. If you have any questions, please do send those in to the chat box. We'll be here for a bit longer. Happy to answer any questions that you have. So we do have one question. What do you think about the significance of the motor genetic connection? Like, what is that all about? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So a couple of studies, there was also a follow-up study done to look at that connection. And I think what's going on is that when you find a very rare genetic variant, which is more or less a rare genetic syndrome, if you will, if you want to call it that, it often comes, a genetic change like that comes with significant impairments. And so I think what you're seeing is that correlation reflected the fact that for those children with, they call them likely gene disrupting mutations, that they had general impairment to their brain development and to their overall development. And that is why those individuals tended to have the lowest scores on the coordination questionnaire. They had the greatest delays, the highest extent of delays.
Okay. Someone was asking which edition of the Vineland scale we're planning to add.
Oh, we are going to do the brand new one. So we're up to the Vineland 3, and we're going to put it online, of course. I'd love to interview you all, but I can't. And so we're going to put it online as the parent rating version.
Okay. And is SPARC looking at apraxia and autism and the relationship?
So it's really hard for me to measure apraxia from afar. I wish that I could. We have had researchers study apraxia in our children, including our children with autism, that were part of our, we call our genetics first study. It was called the VIP. It's now called Searchlight. And so to do that, it required a really extensive evaluation in person, because apraxia is not really easy to diagnose. And in fact, I'll also add, a lot of professionals disagree on how to diagnose apraxia, so it's complicated. So I have to think really hard about how I would be able to measure that from afar. I think it would be tricky, but yes, we're interested in it for sure.
Okay, so someone is asking about all of the data that we have on people that don't have autism and how that's important and what we typically use that information for.
So the reason that we collect data on, for example, siblings who do not have autism is, well, for one thing, for the genetic studies, you make a comparison. So if one child in the family has a particular genetic change, and they are affected with autism and other kinds of diagnoses, and then you compare that to a sibling who is not affected with autism or those other diagnoses, you have greater confidence that that genetic change is significant to autism, that it is an autism risk gene. The second way that it's used is researchers will use the data as what we call in experiments and scientific experiments as controls. And so it's just simply to make comparisons, to look at how children with autism differ from the typical population, differ from what we call norms in the population. And the third way you can use it, including collecting data from parents, which we would like to do as well, and we do plan to do, you can also look at what we call shifts, dimensional shifts. So you can look at basically the difference, the distance between an affected child in the family and how different they are. So how far the acorn fell from the tree in comparison with their parents and their siblings.
Okay. Someone was asking about an available list of publications. So you can find that on safari.org. And within that website, there's a section of Safari-funded publications, and you can toggle and click SPARC, and you'll find all of the publications related to SPARC. And again, that website is safari.org.
And I would add, we've only just begun, because a lot of the research that you saw cited here for our SPARC PIs, our principal investigators, our internal staff, research match program. They are still in progress for writing up their results, and so you're still going to see things rolling out in the next year or so.
So someone is asking about if there would ever be a questionnaire that could help to identify hereditary patterns in families, even if the diagnosis may have been overlooked. So I know that's pretty complicated, but you know, it's important.
It is. So right now, as you know, we don't enroll extended relatives unless we already know there are multiple generations with autism in the family. However, for those who we have enrolled, so in most cases that's going to be parents, we do plan on looking at traits of ASD in the parents, things like repetitive styles of thinking, social preferences for social interaction. So we do absolutely plan to do that, and that's on our list.
Okay. Okay, someone is asking if we've thought of partnering with 23andMe. So at this point, that is a no. We do not have any relationship with 23andMe, and we don't plan on that. How long will the SPARC study continue, and how long will the SPARC study continue to collect data?
I don't see any end in sight. That's my answer.
Okay. Is there any population that we need more information about?
Oh my goodness. Yes, so like I said, we really need to do a better job at reaching underserved, underrepresented populations, minorities. We really need to understand better the pattern of service utilization in underrepresented groups. So that immediately springs to mind. We've talked a lot about how we really would like to be able to do more with adults. We have, of course, a much smaller number of adults in SPARC than we do children. And adults are important not only because we want to know what's on their minds and what do they need, but also we can learn a lot about what to expect in the life course of autism, and that's very informative to parents of young children. So it's just helpful in general for us to have benchmarks for what to expect. So I would say the other area is that I think we need to know more from adults. Beyond that, there are so many, there's so many variations in the traits of autism that I could probably talk all day about, particular types that we would be interested in or things that would be important to study. So for example, another thing that springs to mind, or two more immediately, there's the regression cases we talked about. So why does regression happen? How does it happen? What does the life course look like after regression? And the other group would be the baby siblings. There's so much we could do with the baby siblings.
So I have a question. If there were a family or an individual participating in SPARC and they wanted to get involved with more research opportunities, what surveys should they complete so that they could be better matched with research match opportunities?
That's a really good question. So my understanding is that research match relies heavily also on the background history form. So that's a good one. And they always look at the SCQ because, like I said, the social communication questionnaire, like I said, that confirms the significance of the autism, the level of autism, if you will. And so researchers very frequently will check that one and use that when they're looking. Otherwise, it really depends on their study. It really depends on their study, and sometimes it depends on geography. So if you register, then you may have and you fill out all your registration questions, then you may have a good chance of being contacted.
And so in terms of genetics, SPARC is just beginning to match people to other research opportunities based on genetics.
Yes,
is that correct?
That's correct. So we do have researchers that have come through that have asked for particular types of genetic changes and are looking. And so actually that's a really good point, Vincent, because it's not only the genetic changes that SPARC finds when we do the sequencing and the analyses of your samples, it's also what parents report in their basic questionnaire. So we have that basic screening questionnaire with the medical screening. In there, you can report if you already have a genetic finding, and then researchers will want to come find you if they want to study that particular condition.
And of course, we need the saliva samples back for that to occur.
We need saliva samples so that we can confirm, and then a lot more research will be done if we have actual samples, yes.
Okay, so we'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has additional questions. If we didn't answer your question specifically, or you would like to elaborate, you can always email us at info@sparkforautism.org. Someone is asking, okay, so how are families affected by ASD selected or invited to participate in SPARC?
Anyone, if you have a diagnosis of autism, your child has a diagnosis of autism, anyone can be in SPARC. You just go online and you sign up, and just please bear with all of our registration questions. And you make it to the end. You have to make it to see the thank you page, and then you're golden. But anyone with a professional diagnosis of autism is welcome.
And additionally, we partner with many research institutions and medical schools and hospitals across the country to help recruit for SPARC, as well as community organizations and national autism organizations such as Autism Society of America. So we try to reach as many people as possible through our clinical site network and our partnerships. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions, so we're going to wrap things up here. Again, thank you to LeeAnne for joining us, and thank you all for being on the line. And you can always access recordings of all of our webinars on our website at sparkforautism.org.